I'm going to start recording. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar for landowners in Hudson Valley. My name is Eugene Kwok, and I'm co-hosting this event with Helen Marsh. So before we begin, I would like to just introduce myself and the background of this webinar. So as many of you know that I wear many hats. I'm a professor and an architect. But most importantly, I'm a landowner, like many of you. I have really love for the land and really passionate about sustainable land management, regenerative farming on my lands, and the support for young and beginning farmer for social and environmental responsibilities. I have a property in Orange County. My wife, Claire, and I've created this beautiful place that provides 30-year free land lease and an on-site affordable housing for beginning young farmer family. Currently, we have 3 farming operations on my land, and it has been both really rewarding and very challenging journey. When I first began this project about 8 years ago, there are moments where I felt really quite lonely in the process. Although I had been really blessed with all the support from all of the organizations and service providers in Hudson Valley, it really was challenging navigating the complexity of the land management and supporting young farmers without a community to rely on. Then I realized how crucial it is to be part of a network that can offer support for each other. And this is why today's webinar is especially personally really meaningful to me, because I know the value of connection. And I hope this webinar will empower each one of you with knowledge, tools, but really most importantly, sense of belonging. And I must share that, this webinar, this really originated about 2 years ago. I, along with many of the landowners who are also joining today, have participated in a series of workshops hosted by American Farmland Trust and Glenwood. And these workshops were truly invaluable in helping many landowners understand how to implement healthy farming practice on our lands. And since then, our cohorts continue to meet independently, and we have built a network across the Hudson Valley and sharing our experience, insights, and resources. So just recently in early August, we felt the need that this group has to really expand. It was really a pivotal moment for us to consider a larger group. So Helen Marsh kindly hosted our first in-person meeting, and that event featured a partner farmer and focused on the regenerative grazing. And the discussion from that very day really inspired us to organize more activity like today's webinar for landowners. And I want to highlight that today's event is really independently organized gathering, and it's really meant to be an open forum for us to continue our conversation and help each other explore regenerative farming and land management in more depth. So we're really fortunate today to have 2 experts from American Farmland Trust, Tim Biello and Molly Johnston-Heck. Tim and I connected about 8 years ago at a workshop, and he has been very, very supportive. He's my go-to person, and I'm so glad that he can join us, and also Molly. And they have been really integral in guiding landowners, offering really valuable resources and insights into farmland conservation, sustainable agricultural practice. Their work really has been really helping a lot of really countless landowners build partnership with farmers and stewarding their land responsibly. So today, Tim and Molly will cover various key topics, and these are the topics that we also have been discussing in the series of workshops that I participated. And by the end of the session, you'll have the knowledge to have a meaningful step towards fostering regenerative land management. And you'll also be part of a growing network of landowners and the service providers who are dedicated to sustainable practice. So before we begin, this is some housekeeping items. I'd like to ask everyone to please introduce yourselves in the chat. There is a function that you can chat to everyone. So tell us a little bit about yourself. And since the first hour, we'll be providing a broad overview of various topics. Please feel free to use the chat, once again, chat to everyone, to ask questions throughout. Molly will be monitoring these questions on the chat, and we'll address these questions during the second half, where you are going to be unmute and you can participate in an engaging discussion. So once again, this is a 2-hour session. The first hour will be structured as an overview of many topics, and it'll be recorded so that who couldn't join us today can really benefit from this information. The second half, the second hour, will be an interactive session where you're unmuted and we can dive deeper into the specific issues or questions. And that part will not be recorded, but we'll summarize everything, the key points, and we'll share with everybody. And finally, the final 10 minutes, the last 10 minutes, we want to reserve that time specifically for landowners. We want to have a discussion among landowners to talk about our next steps. So I'm sorry, service providers and organizations, it's just going to be the farmland owners. So I'm very excited to see what today's discussion really brings, and I'm excited to hear everyone's thoughts. Regenerative farming isn't really about implementing practice on your land, but it is more about community collaboration and shared vision that we build together. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Tim and Molly, who will begin today's presentation. So thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to our continued conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Eugene. And yeah, thanks, Eugene and Helene, for inviting Tim and I to present today. I'm just going to take one moment to share my screen before I get going. Can folks see that?
Yep,
yeah,
we can see
okay,
it.
Great, perfect. Wonderful. Well, again, thank you so much to Eugene and Helene. We're excited to be here to talk about owning farmland and connecting with farmers and all sorts of different things. So Eugene gave a great spiel in terms of the context of this. I wanted to just give a quick disclaimer before we get going that the workshop series that Eugene referenced was a 5-part series where we had like 4-hour workshops, including a farm tour. So we have about an hour right now to go through all of the information that we covered in those workshops. So I just wanted to give you all just a disclaimer that this is sort of a brief overview. We're going to touch on many, many topics. We're going to give you lots of examples of resources, and just know that we are here for further conversation. Obviously, we'll have several, about 40 minutes for questions and discussion today, but also please get in touch with us, Tim and I, after this session if you have follow-up questions or you want to dig further into something. We know that this is a very high-level overview. So just wanted to start with that. We are available, and I will kick it over. So really, really briefly, again, before we get too deep into it, as Eugene said, my name is Molly Johnston-Heck. Just to give you a sense of who I am, I live here in Troy, New York, so the upper Hudson Valley, a little bit further north than many of you. And I am the Regional Farmland for a New Generation Manager here at American Farmland Trust. We run a program called Farmland for a New Generation that is focused on farmland access and farmland transition, and I work really closely with Tim to help implement that program. So I will kick it over to Tim.
All right. Thank you so much, Molly, and thanks to everyone for being here, and to Eugene and Helene for helping to organize this. Am I coming through okay? Great. Yeah, so appreciation to both of them for coordinating this, to all the farmland owners we got to work with through the pilot, through an expansion project we did around the state, and to everyone we're getting to connect with here today. I think we can kind of jump to the next slide, which we have a lot of appreciation for it. Oh, actually, this is, let me step back for a second, just give you an overview. Oh, is this where? Yeah, we can work here. That's perfect. Thank you. We'll talk a little bit about why it's so critical to be engaging with farmland owners, and sort of one of the ways in which we look at it. But I should back up for a moment just to say my name is Tim Biello. I work with American Farmland Trust in our New York office as a New York program specialist. So I get to work with a lot of farmers and landowners on farmland access and transition and conservation projects. I do also have a farm in Eastern New York in Saratoga County, and we offer a full year community supported agriculture farm program for folks on vegetables, and we have some livestock as well. And so I have a connection to this work both through the American Farmland Trust position that I hold and getting to work with so many farmers and landowners around the state and sometimes nationally as well. And then also have a personal connection to it through my own farming experiences. So I'm really glad to be here and hope to bring up some important points that everybody could apply to their own projects, and also feel like, as Eugene said, it's really important to have a network, to have peers, to have folks you can rely on. So everyone on this call, myself and Molly and others are a group that you're going to be able to connect with moving forward. And that's really important for the big goal that I think we all share in common is we want to see more land stay in agriculture and be available to farmers. So today we're going to talk about the items you see listed here. And as Molly said, we have an opportunity to do mostly a cursory walkthrough on these items. We hope the strength in that is that it's going to lift up some really important pieces of each of them, give you something tangible to be searching for, and even sort of a process to see yourself moving through. While it's not exactly linear, there is a progression to it, and there is sort of an order to it that is helpful to keep in mind, even though you might jump around a little bit within this list. So we hope it's still helpful today to get these tangible pieces in place for you to follow up on, as well as all the people here to be able to follow up on it with. We can jump to the next slide, and this is the one that sort of just sets the stage for some of the importance of really your situation and your position as a farmland owner. Farmland is a critical resource for so many reasons. When we think about it, one of the first things that comes to mind with farmland is food, and that is an incredibly important part of it, but farmland is also habitat. Farmland also can purify water. Farmland is a place where you have a lot of farm labor and human relationships that are happening and how those are managed. Farmland is an important community resource and often a place where a lot of people, appreciate seeing or being a part of the land that's in their area. So it provides a critical resource in so many different ways, and it is also one that is at risk. So from 2001 to 2016, you can see that here in New York, we lost over 250,000 acres of farmland. And about half of that is some of the best land for growing food. A very small percentage of New York's farmland is protected. And by that, what we mean is as an agricultural conservation easement on it, or is it some other way protected for the purpose of keeping it available for farming. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those details as we move through this overview today. But the take home from this is to say that the resource you steward as a farmland owner is really important in a lot of different ways. And we're going to focus on today how it's really important for the farmers who want to establish farm businesses on your property and take care of that land and be a part of the communities that they're integrated into. And so you as the farmland owner can play a big role and an influence on how that all plays out, both during your tenure as being a farmland owner. And as we all know, that'll change. We're all going to be, I own farmland in Eastern New York, and I feel really privileged to be in this position. I also see that I'm a part of it for now, and that it's going to turn over to somebody else in the future. And I think we have the opportunity to both try to achieve our personal goals and see beautiful things happen on that land while we're here, and to also try to plan for something good for it in the future when we turn it over. So why don't we jump into it? Where we want to start today is with the fundamentals. And this is sort of where we recommend people start their journey on figuring out what they're doing with their land. And you may be further along with some of this, but there still hopefully are parts of this that are good to step back to, think through, have as a touchstone as you proceed. When we say fundamentals, we're thinking about two categories in particular: understanding the land and understanding the people. And so in both cases, what we want to do when we think about these is to get a better sense of what it means. So let's break down the land first. The land in this case is your property. And understanding the land means getting to know the soils and the physical features of your property. That's the topography and the climate and other details like that. It's considering zoning and land use regulations that are relevant to how farming would occur on your land. And otherwise to learning about the suitability of your land for farming. So what is it particularly well suited to produce based on the physical characteristics, or less well suited to produce? What restrictions might exist based on local zoning or other municipal or state or federal regulations? And also, what is the regional farming context in which your land is situated? So in this case, it's thinking about who is farming nearby? What are they producing? What type of agriculture is happening in your area? What kind of markets are nearby? How close are your neighbors? How might they feel about the various types of farming that could happen on the property? Are there agricultural suppliers and providers in your area? How close are they? How far are they? What infrastructure is present on your land or might need to be present for somebody to make a viable go at having a farm business there, and so on. The overall idea in trying to understand your land is to start looking at your land, both so you have a better sense of it, but also to start looking at it and understanding your land in the way a farmer might, and from the perspective of what needs they might have in trying to produce food on that property. In terms of the people and understanding yourself, it's thinking about you as well as other critical decision makers. So one good place to start here is to gauge your level of readiness to make your land available to a farmer. And one way you could do this is to start with understanding the land. That gets you situated. Additionally, you'll want to understand why it is that you're seeking to make your land available. Have personal conversations with yourself, or have those conversations with some of the other decision makers that'll be a part of this. What do you want or need out of a relationship with a farmer? What personal goals do you have for this arrangement? What are you open to having done on the property? Where do you have flexibility versus harder boundaries? And how easily are you able to communicate all of this to yourself or to someone else, or really importantly, eventually to a farmer that you might work with? You can also start by asking about who are the other critical decision makers in this process. These are the people for whom any arrangement with a farmer will also need to work for them. So that could be a spouse, that could be a sibling or other co-owners of the property, might be children. It could be very close neighbors. You are the judge of who those folks are, but engaging them in the process will also be important to seeing it developed well. Do you have other advisors with whom you want to get input from along the way? We recommend, and we'll talk more about the New York Farmland Finder website, which has some useful tools such as a self-assessment, but I want to lift up the idea of a self-assessment now and talk about the fact that this is a way to sort of lift up the topics that maybe you have more familiarity on, as well as the ones that you have less on. And this can help you sort of say, where should I do more learning? And how do I pursue those by, say, reading online materials, doing worksheets, engaging with service providers and advisors, networking with other farmland owners, such as folks on this meeting right now, or that are in your neck of the woods. Or if you don't have that network in place, there are probably folks who can help make that connection for you. And this self-assessment tool you can find on the New York Farmland Finder website. You see a screenshot of it now, and in a little while during this presentation this morning, Molly's going to walk through some of that website, and that's a really nice spot that after you listen to this presentation, after you do some thinking on it, you can go there for both the self-assessment tool, you can walk through some of these sort of the topics that we're covering today, and you can also make a connection to organizations who do work in this space on farmland access and transfer and conservation, and they can work with you on a one-on-one basis. So I think we'll jump to the next of the topics, which is connecting with farmers. And as I noted, to some extent, you might be doing these steps in a variety of orders. There's a linearity to it, and we recommend that you do some amount of the fundamentals before you take big steps in the other places, but to some extent, it can happen simultaneously. We just feel that the greater your clarity on your land and your own goals and what you hope to achieve with this, the better able you are to communicate about both of those, and the greater then your ability to make a good connection with a farmer. So we suggest taking time to think through the fundamentals, and then to take time to think through your plan for outreach. What is it that you're going to be telling somebody is available? That plan should start with a concise description of the land. So taking the time to understand the land will help you here. And you're going to want to think about it from the perspective of what does a farmer need to know about the property? And it should include information about the opportunity as well. What are you talking about in terms of acreage or infrastructure or housing, the other needs that might be in place when you make that connection with the farmer? You can also share about, or at least consider for yourself, what you hope your involvement is in this process or isn't, along with the vision that you have for the farm. Being able to have all these items in place, coherent and ready to be shared or written down, will help you clarify them, help you communicate them. And it's also materials that you can then really easily share around through different networks to get it in front of farmers. So it'll help prepare you. And then it's also a tool you can use when you're doing your outreach. You're going to be able to further build out your plans by developing a list of questions that you feel are important to ask of potential farmers. So you could have that list ready, and that's going to be items that, for example, we can share suggestions with you. They're going to be items that are personal to you that you want to make sure you drill on and lift up when you're talking to somebody. You can also have a go-to list, and we advise that you have a go-to list of folks who you're working with on this project, who you can go to with questions, or once you make a connection, who you might be able to go to sort of help you evaluate and proceed in working with a farmer, a specific farmer that you make a connection with. So you have this all in place. And then the next step you have is the second item here, which is to try and connect with and build and sustain a relationship with farmers. So after you have it in place, you start doing that outreach. The New York Farmland Finder is a great way to do it. Regional navigator organizations. These are groups who are part of the Farmland for a New Generation New York program that we coordinated here at American Farmland Trust and working closely with organizations around the state. You can outreach through them as well. And word of mouth is always super important. Well, what's the next slide that we have? Yeah, so this is a good screenshot of that New York Farmland Finder website that you could go to. Again, hopefully you've done some of that fundamental work. You've started to think about your outreach plans. This is a place you're going to be able to go to put a listing up of the farm opportunity you're making available and to get assistance on doing that. And then also to connect with those regional navigator organizations that I just mentioned. So that'll be a really helpful tool for you. And we will, again, be looking over that shortly. One last note that I want to lift up for this connecting with a farmer topic is to approach it as a process. This is partly expectation management oriented, to know and plan around this taking time. Don't be frustrated if making a connection with a farmer takes a while. That's okay. It's better to put the time into it, to take that time along the way to develop your plans, gain better understanding, think about what your property might need to be better suited to having a farmer come onto it, and all these other details, and stick with it over time. But be prepared for it to take time and to be a process. The recommendation to see it as a process is also important to keep in mind once you've connected with somebody, because once you've made that connection, it's still going to play out over time. You're still going to need to develop a good arrangement with them, such as a lease. It will continue as you manage that relationship. After you sign the lease, there's still ongoing work in terms of good communication practices and stewarding the relationship and seeing it as a one that can work for both you and the farmer you connect with. And then we lifted up here on this slide that you're looking at, in addition to the New York Farmland Finder and the Regional Navigator organizations, who are great resources for you, there's a lot of other resources you're going to want to and probably need to pursue to really get the information about the opportunity out and in front of farmers and to make that connection. So this isn't an exhaustive list by any means, but it gives you an example of both some of the organizations you might pursue connecting with, being able to get your information out on various listservs through their networks, being able to start a word of mouth plan, finding other farmers and landowners in your area that you could share your plans with, being able to attend events that are hosted in your area that will bring together farmers and farmland owners is a great way to network, to both build up your understanding of the topics being presented on, but also to meet other farmers and farmland owners and advisors, and things like that. So we just want to highlight that there's a variety of paths you'll probably end up using to share information and try to make that connection. We can jump now to the next topic. So you start with the fundamentals, you build out a plan for, and then begin to try to connect with, and hopefully do connect with a farmer given some time. And then once you've made that connection, you're going to be thinking about what type of arrangement you're going to make with them. So most commonly, and what we're going to spend more of the time on right now, is leasing opportunities and leasing arrangements, but there are other arrangements that we'll touch on briefly today. So there are a lot of good resources out there that can describe the basic terms of a lease and what should be a part of any good farm lease. We'll lift up a few here, but encourage you to then follow up on and review these resources we're sharing with you today, many of which are listed on the New York Farmland Finder, to go more in detail and to look at a more complete list of all those terms that should be included. But for now, I'll identify a few. To start with, every lease is going to describe the parties, who's involved, the term of the lease, how long is that lease going to run for, and details specific to rent. How much is rent? When is rent payment due? And also these things will relate to, or what happens if rent is not received? What's your process there? Stepping back to that term of the lease and to how long it runs for, one detail to keep in mind, especially here in New York, is that as a farmland owner, if you enter into a lease agreement with a farmer that is at least 5 years in duration, you would then be qualified or eligible, rather, to potentially receive beneficial tax treatment or an agricultural assessment on your property, which can be helpful, especially depending on where you're located in New York. We're not going to go into detail on that. There's actually a pretty good website that the Department of Tax and Finance, New York State has on agricultural assessment overview. We can share links to that, and there's resources to find more details there. Any of us can also help talk more about what the considerations are in terms of eligibility and qualifying for that and getting that. But the term of lease is relevant to it, so I wanted to lift it up here. And part of sharing about rent and saying it's going to spell out what the rent is, how much and when it's due, and what happens if it's not made, if rent payments aren't made, is that you're developing the lease to set and stage a really clear relationship and hopefully build the foundation of a really good relationship. The lease also serves as a backdrop for when something goes wrong. Thinking through those details up front and having a clear plan or a process in place is a really helpful thing to have. So the lease does that for you too. In addition to the parties and the term and the rent, you're going to want to describe what is included in the lease. I want to lift it up here again to say what's important is to be clear. What land is going to be included, what equipment is or is not included. And with all this, you want to detail it. And we recommend that you have a map and that you take the time to develop these aspects of the lease, because that's establishing a good foundation, and it's going to create clarity in the relationship between you and the farmer. Repairs and maintenance and improvements is one other element of a farm lease that I want to lift up here, because it's one of the areas where there's often the most friction that happens. It's one of the areas that is kind of complicated to figure out exactly who's responsible for which repairs and maintenance, or what kind of improvements can be made. And when we make those, is that a farmer expense? Is that a landowner expense? Is that a shared expense? And in what percentage? Who pays what percentage of it? It gets complicated. There's no exact or one right way to do it, but taking the time to think through that detail and to establish, generally what we recommend is establishing a process for figuring out the percentage or who's responsible for it or how it happens. That's something that can be done at the front end of the relationship and can be really helpful later when you have to come to a decision about it, especially if it's in the heat of the season and there's a lot of things going on. Having to get into an extensive negotiation about who pays for the tractor breakdown that happened is not ideal timing. So you want to take the time up front to work through some of these details, and there's lots of resources available to help you with that. Lastly, I want to lift up communication and dispute resolution. We strongly encourage that you include a communication schedule in a lease, and that you actually spell it out and you say, we're going to meet for 2 hours on the first Monday of every month for the first 6 months of our lease, or something like that, and spell it out. You can always adjust it as you go, but having it in writing and having a specific plan is going to be more likely to have you have that meeting and keep up with ongoing communication, so that you can nip in the bud any issues that are coming up, clarify any questions that are coming up, and otherwise be working together as the lease plays out. Dispute resolution is important, again, because issues will come up. This is going to be a relationship. You should expect there to be challenges, and having a plan for how you manage around those challenges is really important. And ideally, again, you want to do that before the challenge is present, so that when it comes up, you're ready. You have something in place you both agree to and you can lean on. I'll note, so that was a quick overview of some of the terms. Lots more to dig into there, but I think those were a few good ones to lift up here. We do often encourage farmland owners and farmers to work together on creating a lease. You can DIY the drafting portion of developing a farm lease pretty well by using existing resources and customizing the details to yourself and the farmer you're working with. It's a great way to do that, is a great way to build a good relationship and understand one another's needs, to see where you have overlapping interests or differing needs, to see how well you work together. It can help to raise up any red flags before you've entered into a legal agreement, as well as help you both prepare to sustain that agreement by establishing a working relationship. We do, though, recommend before finalizing and signing the lease, we strongly recommend getting an attorney review of that. The attorney review helps to ensure the lease says what you think it says from a legal perspective. And it's again, it's an important role of the lease, is to ensure that there's a process in place for if something isn't working out. So you want to make sure that everything is sort of enforceable and it's clear that you use the drafting process to build a relationship, but you also bring in attorney review and use the process to kind of have a plan for how you hope it will work, but what might happen if it doesn't. I want to note that we have a slide here, so I'll quick aside. This is from the University of Vermont website, the Farmland Access Legal Toolkit. They offer a build your own lease tool. Land for Good has a really good lease building tool. These are two resources that we'll share out with you and that you can link to through the New York Farmland Finder website. that not only help you to find the terms of a lease, but also provide some description about what each of those are. In some cases, provide sample language and even allow you to start building out and saving a draft lease as you go. So you can use something like this in partnership with the farmer to actually DIY it together and then again get that attorney review later. Before moving off of the leasing topic, I want to talk about creating a more equitable lease. So here, talking about the process and the outcome and the ongoing work. So one important consideration to bear in mind is that for the farmer who might be leasing your land, they're likely seeking to develop a business there. And they're seeking to develop a business that is very much dependent on secure and affordable access to the land that you're making available. So even just in this way, there's a power dynamic at play. Being aware of that, being cognizant of that, and trying to take that into account as you go through the drafting process is really important. One way to create a more equitable lease then with a farmer is to develop that lease in collaboration with them and work with them. Take the time to draft the lease together and ensure their needs are included in it. And the way you set up that process, such as where you meet, how you invite their input, the weighting that you give to their needs, and inclusion of security in the lease's terms can go even further towards creating a more equitable arrangement with you and the farmer. And you can then further demonstrate that commitment to having an equitable arrangement with them by upholding the terms, by having ongoing communication, and by working together through the arrangement. These examples sort of highlight how you can develop that lease in a more equitable fashion. There are going to be further details, and this is true for any farmer and any farmer you're going to work with. There are going to be further details and considerations that you'll want to take into account when working with farmers who are, to use the USDA's terminology, socially disadvantaged, and when building equity into your arrangement with them in mind. This large and diverse group of farmers includes Black, Indigenous, and people of color farmers, women farmers, farmers who are immigrants for whom English may not be their primary language, and others. We're going to go into some more details about how you build equity into your plan and keeping these farmers in mind in just a little bit within this presentation. But for now, I just want to say that some of the approaches to equity are going to be general to all farmers, and others are going to be more dependent on the relationship you build with specific farmers and specific groups of farmers. Last but not least, other tenure arrangements to be aware of. So we're just briefly going to overview a few of these so that you're aware of them and that you can decide if diving further into any one of them makes sense to your situation. Some of them are just variations on a lease. And in this regard, what I mean is differing terms. So you can have a very short-term lease, a year-to-year lease. You can have a more medium-term lease, let's say 2 to 3 to 4 or 5 years. And then you can have a longer-term lease, 5 to 10 plus years. Those are going to have different implications in terms of that agricultural assessment that I mentioned. They're going to have different implications in terms of what a farmer can or can't invest in, or who might be a good fit for that arrangement. Somebody looking to put in an orchard isn't going to be a good fit for you if you really only want to get into a year-to-year lease. And there's other ways that you could play that out. Another variation on lease is a more dramatic variation and would be a ground lease. This is of a much longer term, sometimes even up to 99 years, and could be transferable between generations of farmers. It is a lease of the land, but it allows for ownerships of the structures that are on the land. It's sort of an equity building and security measure that's built into the ground lease. Another and increasingly common strategy for securing tenure on farmland are cooperative farming models, wherein you might have multiple farmers or farms joining together to access land. It can help farmers manage the significant cost barriers associated with accessing land, helping to share out the costs of startup, helping farmers to have built-in community by working together on a property. So you may come across farmers who are looking to do that as you start reaching out and making more connections with farmers. And there are resources out there to learn more about this. 2 other farm access arrangements I'll lift up here briefly are partnerships and management opportunities. So the former could involve you as a landowner partnering with the farmer and going in together on the business in a variety of ways. And the latter would be if you as the farmland owner were going to try to own and operate the business or own the business, but hire out the management of that to a farmer. All of these have different implications and different ways you might pursue them. And so we're not going to dive into all that now, but I wanted to lift up that those variations of a lease, cooperative farming models, partnerships and management opportunities are some of the other ways you might consider getting access or providing access to a farmer to your land. We're going to jump now. And again, please remember that we're talking about a high-level overview on these topics. Each of these is going to involve a great deal more detail and thinking, and we are happy to be there to help you through the thinking on it. Hopefully, this cursory overview gives you some of those details again that are tangible and that you can follow up on. And so I hope it's helpful even as we're brushing through it a little bit. This is something you can lean back on and say, what was that one model of the lease that was really long-term and allowed them to, you know, build and own equity in the structures? And you can come back here and find it, and then you can go forth and research it further. So hopefully this is helpful. And encouraging you also as you're listening in here, if I talked about something briefly that you were interested in getting further information on today, use the chat to go ahead and plug in questions that we can follow up on it when we have some Q&A time in just a little bit. A couple more topics that I'm going to share, and then I'll be turning it over to Mal. So right now, I want to lift up planning for the future. This is one of the really, really important details of this whole thing that is, I wouldn't say it's overlooked, but it's easy to be aware of it as an important detail and then to sort of look past it or focus on all the other elements. But planning for the future of your farm is a really important topic for us to cover today. And then I really want to encourage everyone here to think about how, as a farmland owner, you can start planning for the future of your farm sooner than later. Examples that are, you can begin discussions about these matters today. You can begin meeting with advisors and reading related resources today. You can begin putting plans onto paper or otherwise taking actionable steps in this direction today. You know, the right time to start this planning is yesterday. If you haven't done that, let's do it today. So we really want to drive home that this is important work. It'll inform what you do right now and in your arrangements with a farmer by having a better sense of what you want to do for the future. And it'll also help make those future plans be more likely to come together. In planning for the future, one of the details that we're thinking about here are the estate planning details and planning for the transfer of either an existing farm business, maybe that's someone inside the family or outside the family, or sustaining an existing farm lease arrangement when the land might transfer from, say, one generation of farmland owner to another, or other variations on this topic. These are complicated processes and decisions that involve financial considerations, family dynamics, planning around an uncertain future, and trying to account for the variety of goals of all the different decision makers who might be a part of it. It can take a long time. So again, that's why starting sooner than later and engaging those decision makers and engaging advisors is really important. One place you can start immediately is, if you don't have it already intact, is getting your initial estate planning details in order, having a will, getting power of attorney in place, having a healthcare proxy, having a plan for what happens with this important resource you're stewarding. Doing all this gets those important details ironed out. It also, during the process, gives you a chance to begin getting input from advisors and family members, getting tax input and legal input, and talking to agricultural advisors to help you inform those details, and then to begin fleshing out other aspects of your plans. We do encourage you sooner than later to start engaging with those other decision makers. Again, that could be your spouse or siblings, for example, with whom you may co-own the property. But the critical decision makers, at least at this stage, are the people who maybe co-own it, have other vested interests in the property, and or who may have some veto power on the decisions that you make. So you want to make sure that they're engaged earlier than later so that you can start building plans around all of you. We'd also encourage you to start sooner than later talking with future decision makers. Thinking about this, that might be adult children. This might be incoming farmers to whom the land may transfer, or others. The sooner, the better. It allows you to start incorporating both the existing decision makers and the future decision makers into the arrangement. And last but not least, I've mentioned advisors who you can begin to engage. And we want you to think about this whole process as like building out a team that can support you on making these plans. And among that team, in addition to attorneys and accountants and agricultural advisors, we want to lift up the idea that you can bring in a third party to support your conversations with family members and other decision makers. In New York State, we have a fantastic and free service through the Agricultural Mediation Program. The mediators are trained to facilitate productive conversations. Sometimes people hear mediator and think intractable challenges. You bring them in when there's a problem, and that's what they do. But in this case, and with the New York State Agricultural Mediation Program, it's really helpful to have them as part of the discussions sooner than later. And their role is to facilitate good conversations. So they don't have to just come in when there's an issue. And even better, they come in when there isn't one. And they're a part of the project. Everyone's familiar with them. They know what your goals are. And they're there to help you have good conversations and get through important topic matters to you and the others who are involved. As a quick look back to the leasing discussion earlier, New York State Agricultural Mediation, or regional navigators, or folks in American Farmland Trust and other, can also be party to the lease development process. So you can engage folks like them in having those conversations, again, to help create a more equitable arrangement for having the conversations and to ensure that the arrangement that gets written down and put into practice is done really well, and they can help facilitate that. So the last topic I'll cover is going to be protecting the land. What I mean here is to cover two broad topics. One is agricultural conservation easements, and the other is to talk briefly about conservation or regenerative farming practices. We know that these are two topics of great interest to a lot of farmland owners, and so want to briefly cover them and help you figure out where you might take some next steps here. An agricultural conservation easement is a deed restriction that permanently removes the ability to develop the land for uses other than farming. So in other words, it protects the land for its agricultural use. There's more to it than that, of course, but that's the gist. In practice, what happens is the right to develop that land is either donated or sold to a qualified entity, like a government agency or a land trust, who holds and basically extinguishes that right. And the property then remains in the hands of the private owner, yourself in this case, but with this additional limitation. Now, given that it is a restriction, why, you might ask, would someone put an agricultural conservation easement on their land? And there are a number of reasons. Some are going to be really specific to the individual involved, but a few sort of common or overarching reasons for putting an agricultural conservation easement on the property. One is money. If you are in a position where you're able to donate an easement, there can be tax benefits to you in doing that. If you are not in a situation where donating an easement makes sense or is an option for you, there are competitive grants available to which you can apply in partnership with, say, a land trust to try to sell the development rights to your property. The money that is then generated from that, for a farmer, often that money is reinvested into the business. It can be used to make infrastructure updates. It can do other purposes. It can also be used as a transfer facilitation tool, putting an easement on a property. Again, it could be from having some of the proceeds from the sale of those development rights go to paying off, say, children who don't want to farm the land, but who have some stake in the property. It could help facilitate the transfer in other ways. Perhaps it makes the property more affordable by reducing its development value. You've made the land more affordable, so an incoming farmer might be able to purchase it. So it can facilitate transfer in that way. There are legacy reasons that people want to pursue easements. You have a real love for the land. Maybe the land has been in your family for generations, or maybe it's new to you, but it's really meaningful to you and you want to see that preserved. Legacy plays a big role. And then prioritizing agricultural use and affordability for farmers is another one we want to lift up. When you put an agricultural conservation easement on the property, you're restricting it for farming purposes. You can add additional restrictions to the land that will further prioritize that it is only used for farming and that it is more affordable to farmers. And we're not going to go into the details of a preemptive purchase right as one example of that, but you're welcome to follow up on that if that's of interest to you, and we can provide more details. You want to get into the weeds of an easement, but it's an important way potentially to prioritize farmers and farmland on protected land. For more information, where you can go, the New York Farmland Finder, again, is going to have some good materials for you. You can also visit a website called the Farmland Information Center, which is hosted jointly between American Farmland Trust and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And probably one of the best sources is going to be your local land trust. So especially this is true here in New York, where we are lucky to have a lot of really great land trusts, and specifically land trusts who have experience working on farmland protection. So connecting with your local land trust is going to be a great place to start. We just popped up a slide here with the Find Support heading, and this is a list of regional navigators around New York State, again, in this Farmland for New Generation New York program. Many of the regional navigators are familiar with farmland protection and can provide you with some initial guidance or help you connect to a local land trust. Many of the regional navigators are also land trusts, and if they're local to your area and do work in your area, they're going to be a go-to resource for you as a place to start to learn more. The other topic I said I'd briefly cover is conservation, farming, or regenerative farming. And exactly what this means is going to vary by place. It's going to vary by type of farming and the people involved. Generally, though, it's going to include practices that manage for the stewardship of healthy soils and clean water. So less bare soil, more plant cover, protecting waterways, managing soil so you have less nutrient runoff from over-fertilization or poor livestock practices or poor tillage practices. But again, exactly how you achieve the goals of conservation farming, the means for it is going to be decided by the place. What kind of climate, what type of soils, what's the topography, what type of farming is happening there? Is it vegetable or row crop farming? Is it livestock? Is it orchards? As well as the people. So you, the farmland owner, the farmers, and related advisors. Your soil and water conservation district officers, your natural resource conservation service officers, those folks are going to be able to meet with you to help you think through details really specific to your property. Often regional navigators in the Farmland for New Generation New York program can be helpful with that too. So to get started, connect with them. Connect with your local regional navigator, your Cornell Cooperative Extension office, or that soil and water office, the NRC office, and get referrals from them, as well as start working with them directly on getting maps of your property and starting to engage with what conservation farming can look like. They're often going to be good sources of practical approaches to incorporate it on your property. And I'll note here too that you can build out your arrangement with the farmer, so such as that lease, to stipulate and include, clarify the types of land management practices you'd like to see implemented. It can be built into your lease. It can also detail how you're going to work with the farmer to support them in doing so. That could be helping them connect with resources. That could be helping to pay for some of the additional costs or management practices that might be associated with doing them. It's a way to ensure that your land use goals are met, and also so that the farmers stewarding your land can achieve them for you and with you while sustaining their business. And it's more likely when you build those types of things into a lease and you're a part of that and you're sharing in that, that it's a more equitable and likely longer lasting and more durable arrangement. So I'll stop there, hopefully in okay timing, to turn it over to Molly to review one of the last main topic areas and then to review the website.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tim. That was a lot of information. I've got a little bit more information to share, and then we are going to have a bunch of time for questions. So I'm really looking forward. There's already a couple of great questions in the chat, which I'm just reserving for when we get to that portion, so we don't get too off topic. But please, as Eugene and Tim have said, continue to put questions in the chat. I'm sort of copying and pasting them, and we'll refer back to them in just a little bit. So I want to talk for just a moment about incorporating equity into your plans. This is something that Tim has referenced several times as he's kind of walked through his different sections, and it's something that we really tried to focus on in the workshop series that we did several years ago and have been continuing to sort of explore and refine over the years. So, as service providers, we, Tim and I, and AFT come to this work with the goal of creating secure and equitable tenure arrangements for farmers. We hope that given your clear commitment to agriculture, to farming, to farmers, that you feel similarly in your commitment to equity. And, we want to acknowledge that equity means many, many different things for many people. In terms of this project, in terms of our work with landowners, we look at equity from multiple perspectives just on our team. We look at racial equity, gender equity, economic equity, just to name a few. And there are many other sort of ways to approach this. And so I hope that this section, rather than being sort of a standalone, is really a through line, can be a through line for the categories that Tim already discussed. And I, like I said, touched on several times already. So I'm just going to highlight a few points and a few resources, and there are so many more. And again, please be in conversation with us and with your fellow landowners to explore these further. But the first thing I want to highlight is really taking time for reflection. So Tim mentioned this at the beginning in terms of understanding your values and your goals. But I really wanted to highlight two different resources that I think can even go further in terms of elevating your time for self-reflection. One is Land for Good, which is an organization based in New England, has developed just in the last few years a guide called Towards Land Justice, which is actually a guide for farmland owners in terms of understanding how they can contribute to land justice. Tim has contributed to that. Several partners who are on this call are familiar with that guide. I think it can be a really great tool for landowners as you start to think about approaching equity, approaching justice in your sphere of influence. The other thing that we have created here at AFT is a set of reflection questions, which again are located on the Farmland Owner Hub that I'm going to walk through in just a minute, so you can see sort of the PDF of that and download that easily. These are just really questions to take time with yourself as well as with those other decision makers kind of on your team, whether that's your partner, your children, whoever that may be, and really just use those questions as they're helpful to you. Think about who are the decision makers? How do you own your land? How did you come to own your land? what are your values, again, sort of back to some of what Tim referred to earlier in the presentation. The second thing I want to highlight is really learning about the history of your land. So really, at a very basic level, just understanding sort of what has happened in the past. This means multiple different things. There was a question in the chat about sort of looking at past uses of the land in terms of whether it was used for livestock or vegetables or things like that. So understanding sort of the more immediate, maybe the last 10 years, 20 years, 100 years of, what was happening on that land in terms of agriculture or not, but also even looking back further in terms of, who stewarded this land in the past, whether your family has owned it for 1 generation, 10 generations, there was somebody there before you, right? And so just understanding who those people were, perhaps some of the history of how that land sort of like transitioned over the years, whether that was through however that was through. And so a resource that I really want to highlight there is this website called nativeland.ca, which I actually have a little screenshot of, which is a really interesting and useful tool that helps to kind of visualize who the indigenous peoples were that stewarded land at any given place. You can actually put in your address of your property and use the website to learn more about the relevant indigenous nations who have stewarded the land, their languages, treaties associated with that location. So again, I, as somebody who owns land myself, I have found that really helpful and interesting to really further understand the history. Go back to this previous slide. So the next point that I just wanted to bring up is to really think about housing and other infrastructure. Again, Tim has sort of touched on this throughout, but a really practical, tangible way to think about incorporating equity into plans is to think about what that situation is going to be like for a potential farmer. Housing is a huge, huge, huge challenge in the Hudson Valley. The cost of housing is really just not affordable on a farmer's salary in the Hudson Valley. And also thinking about other infrastructure, whether there is storage that is needed or, irrigation lines or fencing or things like that. Those are the things that are going to make or break a farming arrangement for a farmer and are really going to go a long way to making it a really great arrangement for somebody. And so again, I'm highlighting one resource here, which is that there is a group in the Hudson Valley called the Farmer Housing Working Group that has developed some really great, done some good research. They actually did a survey, and there's a lot of really great information in this website that I will put in the chat in a moment. You can also just Google Farmer Housing Working Group Hudson Valley, very easy to find. But there's just some great information about who farmers are in the Hudson Valley, what they need. There's a learning series. There's several videos, and one specifically kind of calls to attention how to build on farm housing. So just a lot of really good information and sort of thoughts on what creates, how to create a great situation for a farmer, specifically in terms of housing. And then that extends, like I said, to other infrastructure as well. And finally, the other thing that we talked a lot about in the series a few years ago, and that I just want to highlight, this is sort of a very broad category of sort of suggestion, is just to learn about farmers' lived experience, learn about what it is to actually farm, learn about what it is to farm on land that is not your own, and kind of what farmers are looking for in a farming situation, and sort of their experiences and their perspectives. And there are many ways to do this, connecting with different farmer groups and networks through, National Young Farmers Coalition, or there's, going to be, depending on your locality, there's going to be other ways to do that. One resource I just wanted to highlight is this website called Not Our Farm, that actually really tells the story of people who specifically do not own their own farms, and really brings in lots of different perspectives, right? Every single person is going to have a different perspective, view on things depending on their identity, their experience, all of that stuff. And it really highlights just the breadth of experience and the breadth of perspective out there of folks who are currently farming, whether they consider themselves a farmer or a farm worker, but do not own the land themselves. And so again, just a sort of a useful tool, something to explore. It's really, as somebody who cares about agriculture, I find it just fascinating to read people's experiences. It's sort of like, could be a fun kind of homework assignment for yourself, or don't call it homework because then maybe you won't do it. But so So that's what I kind of just wanted to highlight in terms of incorporating equity into your plans. I'm not going to go, there's so much more to say about this, as with all these other topics. I'm not going to go any deeper right now, but happy to answer questions or kind of get into some discussion. So I want to take a minute to just quickly transition. I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint screen here. And we will share these slides just to let you know. We're going to share these slides with everybody after the call. I'm just going to stop sharing that, and I'm actually going to transition. Yeah, great.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's see. Alrighty, so this website is actually broken down into the categories that we talked about today. So hopefully it'll be fairly easy to follow, again, especially if you have the, the PowerPoint, maybe you've got some notes from today, and then you can kind of come to this website. And so many of the resources, again, that we've referenced can be found here. Specifically, someone was asking about the self-assessment tool. So I'm just scrolling down right on the main page of this resource hub, and the self-assessment tool is actually embedded into this web page. So it's not even a separate page, it's just embedded right here, and walks through, these steps of getting started, preparing to connect with a farmer, developing an equitable farm lease. So again, kind of we tried to align the self-assessment with the categories that we've talked about today. You can go through this website in order. You can also skip around. You can do it however you'd like to. So as I kind of continue to scroll down, you can see that again, the site is, oops, sorry, one more little click here, is broken down into these 6 categories that we've talked about: fundamentals, connect with farmers, leasing, and other tenure arrangements, plan for the future. I don't need to read through them, but they're intended to go in order, again, as Tim has said, but you're welcome if you feel like what you really need is some really concrete information on leasing, skip to the leasing part. If what you're thinking about is farmland protection and you'd really love to put an easement on your property and make sure that it is available for farming into the future, skip to the protect the land part. I wanted to just really quickly walk through just the structure of the pages. Again, not going to get into too much detail about every single resource because that would take years. But so if this is the hub fundamentals page, so this is again that first section. Again, it's broken down into some of the categories that we talked about today, like understanding your land. There's a link here for web soil survey, for instance, to understand the soils on your land. There is information about agricultural districts and zoning. So this is actually the link that I put in the chat, comes straight from here. This is information about agricultural assessment. Similarly, understanding your goals, understanding yourself, there's lots of information here. And then as I kind of continue to scroll down, you can find places to get support. So again, that network of regional navigators, we've mentioned Cornell Cooperative Extension, we've mentioned Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS. And one thing that we haven't mentioned is actually this Farm Transition Advisors Directory, which also may be really helpful if you're looking specifically for, a lawyer to review a lease or something like that. But on each page, if you come down to the bottom, you can actually click through to the next page. So if you would like to go in order, you don't have to go back to the home page and kind of, explore that way. You can just click on through, get to connect with a farmer. Again, we showed you the New York Farmland Finder website. We've got some resources about how to actually use that website and our services. And then we move on again to leasing and tenure arrangements. So again, there's sort of a flow to this, and I don't want to take too much more time in going through all the specific resources. This site is also not exhaustive. There are so many more resources that we could have put on here and that we didn't on purpose. We did not want this to be overwhelming for folks. We wanted this to be a starting place where you can start to understand, wherever you're coming at this from, whatever perspective, you've got, start to gather some resources, understand who your team might be, and then start to really gather that team together and really have conversations with people. And through those conversations, access additional resources, have more conversations, get a little bit deeper into these topics. So again, we know that it is not an exhaustive list of all the resources that landowners could possibly use, and we did that on purpose. So the idea is really to help you develop a suite of resources and a team of support, and this is just one tool in achieving those things. And again, like we have said multiple times, I think that sort of conversation and one-on-one conversations are a really useful tool as you kind of start to explore this and think, oh, I really want to dig deeper into that. Reach out to somebody, whether that's Tim or I, or somebody here in this peer network that maybe has experienced a similar situation in the past, or whether that's somebody from Cornell Cooperative Extension or a land trust or another regional navigator. So like I said, this is a great resource. It is located on the New York Farmland Finder website. It is called the Farmland Owner Hub. I believe I put the link in the chat, but I will put it in the chat again. And Tim, is there anything to add before we move on to questions and I stop sharing screen?
No, I think that's great. I think we can dive into the questions. Maybe if something comes up, we can always refer back to it. But I think just making sure that folks are aware of it and know they can go there and search through it, and also make contacts through the website is good.
Awesome. So, all right, I am done sharing a screen so we can all look at each other. If you want to put on your camera, that's great. If you don't want to, that's totally fine. There are a couple of questions in the chat, and I believe there may be some more while I started talking.